Check it. Huh? I could just say, get the slide. I just need to pick this. Hello, hello, test. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Good morning. And for me, spring officially begins because I brought out my Hawaiian shirts. And until it gets cold, that is my Sunday attire. I was given a gift by my sisters, and it was a picture of my dad when I was a little bitty kid wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And then the picture next to it is me and my three sisters, and I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And so I guess I don't remember my dad wearing Hawaiian shirts much, but he did. So let's start with a prayer. Blessed are you, Lord God, our King and Creator. Holy are you, and holy is your name. Father, thank you for this time when we can come together as brothers and sisters to lift each other up and to honor you, to sing praises to you. May this time together today and all our lives be worship to you. Father, as we look into your word, we thank you that you bless us with that, Father. We thank you for the truth that's contained there. We thank you that you've revealed who you are through your word. May we put your word into our heart and let it change us, Father. Make us into who you want us to be. We love you and we praise you. God, my words today, Father, and may you be honored in them. We ask these things in your Son's name. Amen. Today, this is a one-on teaching, and I need to make a correction from the last time I taught, which was a few months ago. I was talking about Jonah, and I said he was going to Tarsus, and the only Tarsus I'd ever heard of was Spain. Well, there's one north, Holy Lands. That's where he was headed. He wasn't headed 3,000 miles away, so that's bothered me. And I hadn't even heard that until afterwards. And somebody said, there's a Tarsus up north. Never had heard that in all my years. So I'm correcting myself. So now consider myself corrected. We want to look at Genesis 38 today. In the Bible, there are a lot of times chapters, verses that absolutely don't seem to make sense. It's like, why is this here? If you took out Genesis chapter 38 and went from the end of chapter 37 straight into 39, you would never miss it. You'd never miss chapter 38. And I'm going to read it. I'm going to put the end of 37 together and the beginning of 39 together. Joseph had been sold to the Ishmaelites, and they took him to Egypt and stuff. Jacob the father's been given the garments, the coat of many colors, and it says in verse 35, it says, all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guards, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. It's almost like a continuous sentence. And all of a sudden there's this chapter stuck in there. The thing about the Bible, there's no wasted words, there's no filler, there's no anything except what God wanted in there. And because we don't understand something, doesn't negate the importance of it. There's another scripture is you'll be reading along, and there's Jacob the father and his firstborn son, it says, and Reuben slept with his father's wife, and Jacob heard about it. Okay. That's in there for a purpose. It doesn't say any more than that very thing, but that had a great effect on history. There's another verse that's kind of puzzling, and it's in a couple places. Exodus 14, or Exodus 23:19, and Deuteronomy 14:21. Don't boil a kid in the mother's milk. Anybody heard that one? What's that about? Real quick, the whole idea is don't take something that was meant for life and turn it into something that kills. The mother's milk was meant to raise for the kid. Don't kill the kid, the goat, lamb, with the mother's milk. That's the idea behind that. There's a lot of other ideas, fertility rights, but it kind of boils down to that, no pun intended. In chapter 38, we see the third oldest brother, Judah. He is the main character here. Judah is the, like I say, he's the third brother, but what he did in this is one of these stories that when you read it, you see that God cuts no slack. He doesn't cover over anything. Sometimes the great heroes of the Bible do some of the most despicable and horrible things. That's what's going to happen in chapter 38. Bring it up to speed. That first thing I said about Reuben, Reuben and these brothers coming from Jacob, they were going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And Reuben was the firstborn. He was the top dog among all the brothers. He did something. He slept with his father's wife, his father's concubine, whatever version that you read. And it says it stops at that, but it doesn't stop at that. Reuben, because of that act, he lost his first position. He got moved down. You had the next two brothers, Simeon and Levi. They did something. They had a sister, Dinah. They'd come back from time with Uncle Laban, really not a good guy. They come down. The sister gets raped by the prince of the city, and these two brothers, Simeon and Levi, they're angry about it. Short story. And they make a deal with these people from the town of Shechem. And anyway, the men of Shechem get circumcised so that they can marry into the family. Well, in 3 days, when it says, and they were sore, those two brothers came in and killed all the men in the town. They lost their positions. You're now down to the fourth, Judah. He's quite a character. Judah, the first time we hear of Judah is in chapter 37. Joseph is told by his father, go visit your brothers. They're up north. Go check on them. They're taking care of the flocks, and go see how they're doing. The brothers were not fond of Joseph. He was treated special. He was the firstborn son of Jacob's first love, Rachel. So he had a special spot in his heart for him. So he treated him special. As a parent, that does not work well. Didn't work well now, didn't work well then. And Joseph he had a couple of dreams where the stalks, he sees the stalks bowing down before him being a stalk, and then the sun and moon and all those things. And it didn't endear himself to the brothers anymore. They ended up hating him. So they're up north with the flocks. Dad, Jacob, he sends Joseph up north to check on him. They see him coming. They said, here comes the dreamer. Even had the nickname for him. Said, let's kill him. And there's stuff that goes on. Reuben says, no, let's not. Let's throw him in this pit here and stuff. So they take him, they strip his coat off, throw him in the pit. And so Joseph is down in the pit, and he's yelling for mercy, and then the brothers go off and decide to eat lunch. That's cold-blooded. Well, pretty soon in the distance, they see this caravan of Ishmaelites. They're going to head to Egypt. And Judah speaks up for the first time and says, what gain is it if we kill him? We can make some coins off this, make a little money. We'll sell him. They'll take care of him. The brothers wanted to kill him. They said, well, we're not going to get our hands. He's our brother after all. Judah's saying this. So let's just sell him. And under that is, we'll let him die in Egypt. And our hands will be clean. So they sell him to the Ishmaelites. Joseph goes off to Egypt. Judah, it doesn't say this, but Judah is kind of moved to that primary position of brothers. Reuben tries it one more time, but he gets shut down. Judah was probably the brother that took the coat in that they put the goat's blood on and gave it to their father. Said, you know who this is? And Jacob was devastated. That's kind of the story of that. Let's make sure. Yeah. Chapter 38. When we read it, a lot of times when we read the Bible, we don't get a sense of the time span. The whole of chapter 38 takes place over probably about a 22-year period. And that's what's good about studying this stuff. I've always read that it's like, okay, he went up here and then Joseph. This story overlaps Joseph being in Egypt for like 22 years. Judah was probably only about 3 years older. That was what I read, and it kind of makes sense. He was probably about 3 years older than Joseph, because all these brothers, many of them had different mothers. There's 2 wives, then 2 concubines, whatever, but there ended up being 12 of them. So some of them could have been born at the same time, but it was probably about 3 years difference. Joseph, when he first comes on the scene, which I think was probably pretty close to the time this all took place, he was 17. He's 17, is taken to Egypt. We know he was 30. It says he was 30 when he went into service for Pharaoh. So if he was 30, Judah would have been about 33. Okay? These were grown men. They were not 14 and 15 and 17-year-old kids. Joseph was, but the rest were older, and Judah wasn't the oldest. So if you go about 22 years, if you go to 30, you have then the 7 years of good. So there's another 7 years, and then you have another year or 2 before Jacob sends down the brothers to get food and grain from Egypt. So they were very grown men when all this happened. Judah, being kind of the leader, he sees what happened to his father, how his father took this news of his favorite son. And what did he do? He ran. He ran from God. He ran from his destiny. You go back to Abraham, and God promised Abraham his family was going to inherit the land and everything. Judah is more or less firstborn now. He says, I don't want any part of this, I'm out. He's not out for a little bit. He's out for about 20 years, 22 years. He's gone. I know I'm not real patient a lot of the times, and I'm really glad God is, because he's patient, and he's setting things up. When Joseph goes down to Egypt, God needed him there. God was going to get him in Egypt in preparation for his family to come down there so that they could be saved. Judah could have hung in with the family and fessed up and stuff, but he didn't. He ran away. So God doesn't do just necessarily one thing at a time. Like in families, if things are going on, he's working in everyone's life in that family. He's doing something here. The picture's right here, and God's over here. He's moving the chairs around. He says, this is how this is going to end up. So Judah, Jacob, and Joseph, 3 J's. While Joseph he's kind of a front man. He goes to Egypt. And during that time, God is going to be dealing with Judah. He lets him go to Canaan and become good friends with Canaanites, who in a few years, in God's time it was a few years, but in the God's time, it's not going to be very long before those people are going to be wiped out. He's preparing this. He's preparing the land. And so Judah is off. He's basically become a Canaanite. He has nothing to do with God. He has nothing to do with his family. He has nothing to do with his destiny. He's off running. He goes down there and he begins acting like a Canaanite. He becomes as bad and evil as any of them down there. He will not. He doesn't see anything other than, I've just got to get away. He was probably depressed and stuff, so he goes down and he becomes assimilated into where he's living. His lifestyle changes. When he does that, now we get to chapter 38. Chapter 38 now begins. All that as an introduction. Genesis 38, starting first few verses, it says, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son. He called his name She conceived again, bore a son, called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son. She called his name Selah. Judah was in Shezeb when she bore him. He goes down. God wanted his family to stay in his family. He said Abraham's lineage was supposed to stay separate because the Messiah was going to come through that lineage. He didn't want them marrying outside. Judah marries a Canaanite woman. Probably has 3 kids, so probably 1 a year. Now things begin to change for Judah, and he's not going to realize it for a while. In verses 6 and 7, it says, and Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. At that time in that area, you were considered ready for marriage when you were like 17, 18. Judah finds a wife for a Canaanite wife. He has a Canaanite wife. Gets a Canaanite woman to be his oldest son's wife. Was a bad guy. Don't know what he did, but God put him to death. And that's what it says about him. What happens next? Okay. Going to talk about what's called a Levirate marriage. Okay. I'm going to read this first. So when died, Tamar was given to Onan was given to the second-born son, Onan. He was now old enough to be married. You married off your firstborn, your oldest first. He gave Tamar to Onan. It says, then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring wouldn't be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In our way of thinking, there's a word that comes to mind in this. Ew. If you're the woman in today's society, it's like, I don't even like my brother-in-law, and I'm going to have kids by him. What this is commonly called is a Levirate marriage. And there's a reason for this. And I think in some place in the world this is still done. Over here on the left, well, let's go over here on the right. Okay. The triangle would be Tamar. Over here, this is the oldest brother. This one is Onan. She was supposed to have children with He dies. So she is given to him to produce kids. When the husband died, it became the brother or the next closest male relative to take on the sister-in-law as a wife so that when a son was produced, the son would carry on the name of the first husband. Therefore, thereby, whatever the first husband had in wealth and everything, it would go to that son. That son would not go to the brother-in-law. After that, if the second wife, if he was already married, he would have two wives. The second wife, if he had any more children from them, they became his children. Onan didn't want any part of this. He almost could have said, when he was real selfish, and he almost could have said, when Judah would have said to him, said, go in and take her, he would have said, what's in it for me? What's my cut of this? If Onan what Onan did was basically turn Tamar into a concubine for his sexual pleasure, but make it so that she couldn't have children. Whenever they had sex, he just did not complete the action inside of her. That's one thing about the Bible, it gets real blunt. And I'm trying not to be that blunt, but that's what happened. He practiced a form of birth control that God did not approve of. God put him to death. What Onan was trying to do, he was trying to say, okay, I got this second wife. I don't want anything. If she never produces a son, I get my brother's stuff. God says, oh, no. Puts him to death. Judah has now lost 2 sons. Who does he blame? Does he blame No. Does he blame Onan? No. Does he blame himself for coming over here and doing all this? No. He blames the innocent party. He blames Tamar. He had 1 more son. After you've lost 2 and you're thinking that way, it's like, there's no way I'm giving her to him because she'll kill him. He'll die. So he says, tell you what I'm going to do, Tamar. Judah says this, Tamar says, you go home and you be a widow because Shelah, my youngest son, he's not old enough yet to be married. So you go there and wait. And when the time's right, we'll get you together. He had no intention of doing this. Does that make sense? Yes. Uh-huh.
Would take that thought away because he says he's not old enough yet. So it could have been 12 years in between that.
Right. It could have been, but it's in a little bit, we're going to find out that in a short period of time, he was old enough to have got married. When the rest of this all goes down. So Onan, he says, nope, I'm not doing this. And he says, I'm going to play this my game, my way. And it didn't work well for him. Yeah, you kind of want to ask Judah, how's this all working out for you, bud? Not well. Judah he begins to do something that is, it kind of boggles the mind. He goes to get his sheep sheared. Tamar, wonder how she's feeling about everything. Great. Judah he's about to hit the lowest point in his life. And God's going to let him. When God's going to get somebody's attention and they will not look at themselves, you can humble yourself and make things right, or be humiliated. And when God humiliates, because he was looking at it all wrong and he was all okay, God's going to let him be, absolutely humiliated. And this is where it really begins. In verses 38, chapter 38, verses 12 through 18. As they say, the plot thickens. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. He's now widower. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear the sheep, she took off her widow's garment and covered herself with a veil. Wrapping herself up, she sat at the entrance of Enan, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up. There's the thing, had grown up and she had not been given to him in marriage. So it happened pretty fast. He moved into marrying age. That's one of the nice things about the Bible. The Bible interprets itself a lot of times. But that was a good question. When Judah saw her, Tamar, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, Come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. What was this bozo thinking? He had chucked his family. He had chucked his heritage, everything. Now he sees this prostitute, what he considers a prostitute. To him, that's what she was on the side of the road. This is Tamar. She's desperate. She needs a husband. She needs a lineage for her to be taken care of and everything. So she changes clothes, goes to this road where she somehow knew that Judah was going to go by at about the right time. She goes there, and her face is veiled and stuff like that. And Judah doesn't think about Tamar. He doesn't think about Abraham. He doesn't think about where he came from. He thinks about right now, the lust in his heart. That was what he wanted. So he makes a deal with Tamar. It says, here's the bargain. And this is in verse 16. She said, what will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord on your staff that's in your hand. So he gave them to her, went into her, and she conceived by him. Bargaining going on. He says, I'll give you a goat, which was, I guess, fair payment in the time. And she says, oh, no. I'm not going to trust you. I don't know who you are. That's if she's playing that part. He says, you give me something that you want back, and then you send me the goat. Okay. Gives your signet and your cord and the staff that's in your hand. The staff was his power. The signet ring and the cord and stuff, that was one, if he made a covenant or something with people, he would use that, my understanding, like his signature. So he did that. It's like, here's my credit card and here's my social security number. I'll come back and get it. So the trap is now set. She's conceived by him. As soon as the act was done, she gets up and heads home. It says, then she arose and went away, taking off her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. Then Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adulamite, to take it back the pledge from the woman's hand. He did not find her. He had shepherds and stuff. But this was still considered offensive. So he had his wingman, the Adulamite, says, take this stuff, take the goat to her and keep it quiet. Don't want to be a laughingstock. Take this and give this to her. He goes, the Adulamite goes with the goat, can't find the woman. And it says, when Judah sent the young goat with his friend, the Adulamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where's the cult prostitute who was at Enan at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returns to Judah and says, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you didn't find her. You didn't find her. I sent the goat. You didn't find her. I can't say anything. They'll laugh at me. We are so afraid of being laughed at. Hadn't changed thousands of years and never will. What he was trying to do, he was trying to get this all real quiet, hush-hush, under the table taken care of. Get his stuff back, everything's good. Now, God begins to unwind the whole thing. And Judah is about to be completely humiliated. Verse 24, about 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out, let her be burned. Oh, yeah. What's good for her, what's good for him is not good for her. Like a lot of the politicians, it's good for me, but you do what I say. Judah was just really being a bad guy, a jerk. But he sees in this a chance to get rid of his problem, what he considers his problem, Tamar. I can get her taken care of. She'll be out of the picture. Well, before a burning or killing was supposed to take place, there would be men around. It was like a council, and there would be sort of a trial. They'd bring her out, question her, and then she would be executed. So he's pronounced a death sentence on her. So she was brought out, and she sent word to her father-in-law and says, by the man to whom these things belong, I'm pregnant. She said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. This is really interesting. She says, pray, can you identify? Go back to Genesis 37, verses 32. We go back to when the brothers brought Joseph's coat to him and says, please identify. It says in this verse 32, they sent the robe of many colors, brought it to the father, and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. The Hebrew word is ekronah. The words that Tamar said to Judah were the same words that Judah would have said to Jacob. He got convicted by his own words. When he heard that, the lights came on. No more hiding. The lights came on, and this cockroach is caught. And he's not just caught him and Tamar, all the men around him, all the servants, and he said, she's more righteous than I am. He's not making an excuse for Tamar, but he's commending her for having to take care of something he should have taken care of. He said, she's more righteous than I. In that, he fell apart. It was like, I'm guilty. And all of the stuff with his father and everything he had done in the last 22 years, it all came crashing down on him in complete humiliation. Is that the end for Judah? Not even close. Try to wrap this up here real quick. We don't hear any more from Judah until chapter 37, or 47 and 48. Make sure Last night I had one of those nights that was real productive. Usually you think of sleeping. Oh no, I worked on Judah. It rolled around in my head, and the bad thing about when you're teaching, you're never quite done until you get up to talk. Because it's like, oh, this is really good. Judah, let's see, make sure. Hang on, I want to make sure. Okay. End of chapter 42. The brothers have gone. It's now in the middle of the famine. The brothers have gone and got grain, come back, and then they say, we need to go back and get more. We're running out. And Jacob said they're supposed to bring back their youngest brother, Benjamin, and Jacob says, no way. And Reuben says, if I don't bring him back, you can kill my kids. Jacob, the father, says, go away. Go away. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. That's kind of paraphrased in there. Beginning of chapter 43, Judah speaks up. He's a different man now. He's a completely different man. Reuben has absolutely been taken off firstborn. Judah now speaks up as leader of the clan. The famine was bad. Jacob says, go again. Judah speaks up and says, we've got to take the brother. Dad says, no. He says, we have to. He says, listen, if I don't come back with the brother, it's on my head. He would take responsibility. Judah goes there and stuff like this, and everything happens, and in the end, they feel like they're about to get hammered and taken away as slaves, and Judah says to Joseph, who's second to the king, and he doesn't know who he is, he comes up to him and says, let me approach you. He was a shepherd. He approaches him and says, listen. And he tells him the story. And he talks, the story of Joseph is in there, but it's like, this would kill my father. Take me. He was ready to take Joseph's younger brother's place. It broke for Joseph. He says, I'm Joseph. Judah spoke up. He was a changed character. He had repented of what he had done and what he'd become to become a completely different man. Out of his lineage, which was Tamar's sons, Perez. Tamar and Perez are in the lineage of Jesus. God takes horrible circumstances and works them out to achieve what he wants. Anyway, that was a quick wrap up. Let's close. Holy Father, thank you. Thank you for this story. Thank you that you waited and chased after a prodigal son, Judah. Thank you for giving us this tale, Father, and this example. Help us to never give up on you and those that we love, Father. You never give up on us. We love you and we praise you. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.